So here we have a Trek Madone 2016 model. So it was launched with much fanfare by Trek, saying that it's the ultimate race bike and it's aero and it's compliant, and it had their ISO speed sort of thing which gives it more comfort, and we'll show you how that works in a minute when we go inside it. But it's got a couple of little bearings sort of right at the seat tube junction, which act as a pivot, and then a tube goes inside the frame, etc. So Trek said that they spent 1.5 years working on this, and hundreds of different iterations and this and that and everything else. So let's have a look and see what it looks like on the inside. So first impressions are that it looks actually pretty clean. It's very, very large, like it's big tubes, big cross sections and all that sort of stuff, which they said they've done for the aerodynamics. And now all the cables are internal. So let me just get the pencil. I'll go back to red on the pencil. Some people didn't like the yellow. So the cables you can see at the head tube, top tube junction there. There's a port there where the cables go in. Now there's also this sort of cutout here, and they had the brakes which were mounted behind these little wings which were covered. It had these little flaps basically on a spring, which pivoted around this point here. We'll have a bit closer look at that in a minute. Now this bike came in because it crashed into the back of a car or something like that, and so the head tube in this area here was delaminated. So when we get to that point, we'll have a closer look at that, and I'll show you the damage that it received there. Here is the ISO speed, so that's sort of bonded to the frame here, and then there's a separate tube which goes up and it pivots around this point here where the bearings and the little axle sit. So then the seat mast can move forward and aft and give it a bit of compliance. So straight to the bottom bracket junction. Now they did use, well, they used their BB 92, whatever they call it, where the press fit goes directly into the carbon molding. And now they have had a lot of problems with that over the time. It's just in terms of tolerances and fits and all that sort of stuff. But I won't go into too much detail about it. Everyone knows about that. Trek have now gone to the T47 threaded shell on their bikes, so hopefully that'll rectify some of their issues. Now this looks like it's molded with a what we've seen in the last quite a number of bikes. The Canyon was similar, and the Giant, where it's sort of a semi-rigid mandrel, which gives you a really nice sort of surface finish without any of the wrinkles. So it's the EPS type molding. Extra bits of fabric through here, sort of where there's like a little cutout port there. There's a threaded insert here. Other little threaded inserts, and they have, you can see also a bit of fabric here. So wherever there's a cutout, they've put some woven fabric to protect the unidirectional from splintering and delaminating when they cut those slots. So that's all pretty good. There's no real wrinkles or anything like that. A little bit of a sort of a rib sort of going through here by the looks of things. Yeah, big surface area though. Like, I mean, the section 2 there is massive. So yeah, but overall looks good. So here's the outside of that of the bottom bracket shell, where they've had problems with the fit with the bearing, and they actually made a series of oversized bearings, where the outside diameter was slightly larger. But the drive side, in my experience anyway, hasn't been as problematic as the non-drive side. So the non-drive side tend to have more problems, and I think it gets moisture in there, the way the seal arrangements is laid out, etc. And there's a little that thread that we saw from the other side, where there's like a little chain guard gets attached onto that to prevent damage from chain drop. We've got the chainstay then being bonded to the bottom bracket lug, and yeah, that looks like a really good bond. You can see it's full of adhesive through there, and down the bottom face, a little adhesive spew out through there, so indicating lots of adhesive. So all that looks good. They've got looks like an extra ply over the top to prevent any of those paint crack indications, which the older Treks in particular were quite famous for. But yeah, that all looks pretty good. Down the chainstay, again, nothing really to see there. That's all clean, very very nicely molded, very uniform. Yeah, good work there. Into the dropout region, and the dropout is a separate piece. You can see that it's bonded here, and again there's good adhesive coverage, bit of a step through there, bit of extra adhesive there. No issues with that. It's the dropout itself is sort of hollow, all molded in carbon and bonded in. That all looks pretty good too. The on the dropout region down here, that you'll notice it sort of curves away, and that's sort of to give a nice sort of gradual transition for the hanger, so it's less likely to fail right in that corner. So that's a good design feature there too. And then moving up the seat stay, again the seat stay looks very clean, no wrinkles, looks molded really well. The bonded up here, again good adhesive coverage, no voids in those joints. So this is quite an interesting feature here. This is their ISO speed system. So it has a tube down the middle here, which is approximately 25 millimeters in diameter, and that's housed within the seat tube, which is a large cross section for better aerodynamics, and it pivots around this point here, and then it can move forward and aft, which will act as give it some compliance. So because you've got quite a long length of a slender tube, so it's bonded to basically to the bottom bracket lug section down here. Got this nice long length, and it pivots around here, and so you get the bending movement happening through here, which then provides that compliance. So it's quite an interesting system, and apparently quite effective from what I hear. I haven't ridden one myself, but people say it's a comfortable bike for because you can guarantee that with the cross section of the seat tube, or the outer seat tube here, it would be a very very stiff, harsh riding bike with that large cross section. So here's how it's attached to the bottom bracket lug, and it's multiple things going on here. So you've got the bottom bracket lug, which is effectively this section here, and then you've got the seat tube, which is bonded there, and that bond again looks excellent. There's good adhesive and no voids or anything like that, so that's good. And then you've got the tube, which is then bonded through here. I'll go on this side onto the lug. So then that so there's basically three pieces that are bonded in that section there. So I'd say they'd bond the tube, the ISO-speed tube. This guy, they bond that first, and then bond the seat tube, the outer seat tube as a secondary. The other interesting thing are the inserts here for the water bottle cages, or bit on the inserts. And instead of using a riv nut, there's a cavity molded into the frame with a threaded aluminium insert. So it means you are limited to the depth of screw that you can run, but it has a nice flush surface on the outer face. You don't have that sort of the typical head of a riv nut, and probably some pros and cons in that if it does corrode or you have problems with it, it's much more difficult to replace. Riv nuts are quite easy to replace, but then they do have more problems as well. So yeah, probably a bit of 6 of one, half a dozen of the other. So moving to the bottom bracket and down tube junction. So we've got this bond here, which we looked at before, and yeah, that's no issues there. It's a good bond. The down tube itself looks like it's just a bladder molded. It sort of has the typical look of a bag. You've got some fine wrinkles here, sort of like an elastomeric bagging material, as opposed to the EPS system down at the lugs here. So yeah, these little fine lines, typical of the resin bleed on the surface of a bag. Here again, you can see the bidon insert, and that's molded in. It's captive. It's got that little sort of step in it, so which mechanically locks it in as well as being bonded. So that's unlikely to go anywhere. If you do damage the thread, obviously a lot more difficult to replace, but you may be able to put a threaded insert like a helicoil or recoil or one of those in there. Moving further along the down tube, I won't say up the down tube. Again, you can see a few little wrinkles from the bag molding it, very minor. That's all very clean. Some good molding there. There is a little bit of a void right on that radius there. It's a little bit hard to see, but it is there, and it's typical sort of bridging void right in that corner, and it's sort of right at the step where this fabric piece ends, because there's a big cutout here where the Di2 junction fits. It's got a little cover and which goes over there. So again, where there's a big cut through the frame, a big hole through the frame for fittings, etc., they have put some fabric in that area to reinforce it. So yep, and reduce the chance of any delamination, etc., when machining the bike. So apart from that little void there on bridging void, which is pretty minor, it's just looking at it. I've got the bike in my hand, so I can measure it here. It's 8 millimeters by, we'll call that probably 4 millimeters. So it's just sort of a little bit larger than yeah. It is a rejectable condition, but very isolated. If you had a whole line of them down the top tube, down the tube there on that corner, which you sometimes get on bikes, that would be much more of a concern. Here's another look. So you can see the size of this cutout where the control box for the Di2 can slot in, or other systems, EPS, whatever you got. There's that void again. And there's the fabric. Yeah, all that's pretty clean. You've got that little insert. There's a threaded insert which is molded in, and yep, no issues with that. That's all pretty good. But we can start to see the delamination through this area. So we'll go and have a bit more of a look at that. So an overview of the whole head tube. There's some little label here which you can quite clearly see. It says 56, and then you have a QR code and some characters and a few other little identifying marks. So some little quality sticker. You can also see the EPS mold number here. So they'd have identifications for the molds. So those EPS mandrels would be pre-cured or cast in a mold, and then to identify which one is the right one for the right size frame, then they'd have identification numbers on it. So that's what that is. Here you can see the threaded insert for the those little flappy wings to cover the front brake, and yeah, I mean overall again that looks pretty clean. It's a very large section, and then yeah, we can see the failure through through this region here. So quite a big delamination. Now it's not that surprising considering how unsupported, particularly that front face of the lower bearing seat, sort of this region here, how unsupported that is. So it's there's not that much material. So when it sustained that impact, yeah, all that energy was absorbed through this small sort of area through here. Let's have a closer look. So the bearing seat itself, which is sort of darker molding, so here, that's completely delaminated from. I'll move that line so you can see it again better. That's completely delaminated from the outer housing of it. The delamination then has travelled all the way down to here, and sort of in this side as well. So quite a lot of delamination, and there's the corner, particularly in that corner there. It's a sharp corner, so right on the outside of the frame, it's a sharp corner, so it's quite a stress concentrator. So it's not surprising with the impact that the bike received that it failed in this manner. However, obviously that's well outside its design load, and it did actually still hold together. So it wasn't a catastrophic failure where the items were separated, which is obviously much worse. If things are contained, and that's all really, that's what you look at with these designs, is the failure mode. So how things fail, not just if they fail, but how they fail, and will that failure become dangerous. Now, in this case, you've still got attachment of the fork through the upper bearing, and it's retained within the frame, and so it's not that it's not a failure critical thing where, like, if the fork steerer breaks, or both legs of the fork break, where you all of a sudden you've got nothing. So but still quite a bit of damage, and just with the design of it, with this big cutout here, this whole area of the headset is really floating in space, and the only thing supporting it is its own stiffness. There isn't the rest of the head tube, which you'd normally have sort of continuing up through here. There's none of that support. So here's another angle of the delamination, and you can really see this is on the other side of the bike, so the other half where the damage was probably a little bit more, and yeah, maybe the impact came from the non-drive side or the left-hand side of the bike, and so you can see, you know, this molded bearing seat is intact, but is completely delaminated from the rest of the frame. The delamination has continued down the tube and across the tube at the back, sort of up to this point here on the side. Now they have got that little foam insert here, which I didn't mention that before, but there's a foam insert to fill that transition to better distribute the stress through that. So yeah, good design features overall, like the way it's done. However, yeah, without that head tube going up through here and supporting it, yeah, it's more likely to fail like that. So yeah, and then from the underside, you can see some of Raoul's yellow pencil all the way down to here, and you know, that's where the delamination. So all that energy needs to be absorbed, and the mechanism for that with composites is delamination typically. So whereas a metal will bend, the composite will delaminate it. So yeah, you can see all the little stress marks and stuff through here and that as well, and yeah, big separation through there. The energy's also yeah, sort of gone up this side. You can see the delamination traveling, whereas the unidirectional has buckled. So you can see the lines sort of like that, where you've had some buckling basically of the fibers. So as they delaminate, they're unsupported and they deflect basically in and buckle against themselves. So yeah, it gives you a good view of that. Some other little label up here. If yeah, someone might be able to identify that. If you know the code, put it in the comments. And then yeah, it's that's a lot of damage. That's a lot of damage. Another view of it, and yeah, I mean you can see the interlaminar shear with the unidirectional. So you know, fabric can give you a little bit more shear strength like that because you've got a little bit more resin, and the undulations of the fabric tend to give you a little bit more mechanical bonding as well, as whereas the flat unidirectional sheets, you don't, they're quite dry from a resin point of view, and the yeah, very smooth and flat. So the upper head will have a bearing junction. Yeah, that all looks fine, and it's not surprising that there's no damage to that, considering that the lower bearing is almost independent. And whether that gives you a little bit more compliance in the ride, that might be the case. But it's definitely independent of the upper, and so none of that energy from that impact is transferred to the upper, and there's no damage in that region at all. So and this is all sort of well done. You've got nice sort of molded transition. Quite a large hole here for the cables. I mean, you've got these sort of bikes are a mechanic's nightmare in terms of cable routing and setting them up and building them like that. It's but what do you do? Some people call that progress. Yeah, is it actually aerodynamically any better? Well, you need a really, really good test to prove that, and that's sort of few and far between. The rest of the top tube all looks pretty clean. There's no issues there. It's all molded well. You can see the sort of the transition here where we've gone from the EPS sort of molding to the bag, and you just get the occasional little wrinkle, resin rich wrinkle. That's not an issue. The the other thing did I mention the foam here in the last one? I'm not sure if I did. A little bit of foam to smooth that transition out, so that's well done. And then we've got the bonded junction from the top tube to the seat junction, and you can see the bond here. That's no problems with that. That's a good bond. It's full of adhesive, no voids. Probably a little bit too much adhesive, but it's better to have too much adhesive than not enough. If you've got a little bit too much adhesive, it just adds a little bit of weight, a few grams extra weight. But if you don't have enough adhesive, then you've got voids and you can have some structural concerns. But that all looks good. No issues with that. And then the ISO speed sort of system, and you can see it's sort of molded in a sort of a bushing where the axle sits in, and then the bearings sit in the corresponding outer part of the frame in a sort of molded in housing. You've got this foam just to support the carbon bush during cure and give it a nice sort of smooth transition. Little bit of sort of crinkling of the bag sort of through this region here, but that's all sort of pretty minor. The wall thickness all looks pretty uniform, and there's nothing really of concern there. Now there is a little hole you can see here, there and through there, and that's where the cable runs through. So you've got a basically the gear cable, the brake cable goes through that section, and the brake mounts on a molded piece, down here on the bridge on the chain on the seat stays. I have seen with these with the ISO speed, the bearing fit get a bit loose, and then you sort of get a little bit of a knock in that. So as this mast sort of moves forward and aft, you can get a little bit of a knock in the bearing, which can be quite annoying. But then you can just replace the bearings and get that sorted out. I've had that happen a couple of times over the years, but overall, it's supposed to do what it does pretty well. So that's a 2016 Trek Madone with ISO speed. It was built well. Like, the only little flaw that we saw in it was that that bridging void on the down tube. Everything else looked really, was well done. So the similar process to the Canyon that we saw recently, where and some people say that they're both made in the same factory. With the basically nice molded lugs, etc. With the EPS system. I think one of the advantages of this particular bike is that with these large sections, it's actually easier to lay them up and put the bag in there properly, because you've got more space to work with and all that sort of stuff. So Now, from a design point of view, you may or may not be a fan of internal cables, and whether they actually make a difference aerodynamically is highly debatable. You need proper testing to really identify that, which sort of beyond the scope of of pretty much everybody in the bike industry, I think. The other design point, having that lower bearing sort of floating in space, sort of being unsupported by the head tube. Now, whether that was a deliberate design to improve the compliance through the front end of the bike, maybe that's the case. It certainly was isolated from the rest of the bike during the overload crash situation, and that was evident by the localized delamination. So all the energy was absorbed in that local spot and wasn't transferred through the rest of the bike. So almost like a bit of a fuse, I suppose. So it was pretty obvious that this bike was beyond any repair as soon as you find that level of delamination in that area. So anyway, I hope you learned something, and enjoyed the review. Now you can see how the ISOspeed system works, and stay tuned for more videos. We'll see you again soon. Okay, bye.